First, let's look at these. What are essential questions? Many studies in cognition highlight the reason it's so important for students to realize why we ask them to do what we ask them to do. The purpose of an activity drives our motivation and engagement in an activity. So going back to the idea of the backward planning. So we pose a question, we've built their inquiry. Now they're hooked, they're engaged. Then we can proceed with this unit. And that's pretty powerful. We're setting the purpose right from the beginning, because without purpose, significant learning is difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. Okay, the characteristics of an essential question. So it has these components. They're engaging. It offers potential for intriguing students and motivating students. Jeff uses often that a question should be sexy. And I think he uses it because then we don't forget. You know, when we're giving each other feedback, you know, I'll call or text Kelly and say, is this question sexy? You know, and then we've learned that, you know, what's sexy for us is not necessarily sexy for our students. So, you know, if we're trying to engage them, you know, what is relevant for them? What appeals to them? So the question has to be sexy, enduring. It leads to learning big ideas that have value beyond the classroom. Again, going back to that real world connection and making things relevant, excuse me. And it gets to the heart of the discipline. It is used by practitioners to do the subject and solve problems and create knowledge in that subject area. And in need of uncoverage. It involves background of foundational principles, rich concepts, theories, and procedures that require unpacking. So it's not just covering a war that happened in history, but it's finding out what influenced this, what, you know, why did people, how did a country get to this point? Why did people allow this to happen in this country, or whatever it is that you're discussing? So it's getting to the actual concepts, the rich concepts that actual historians and people outside are asking themselves. Going back to that correspondence concept, we should be practicing that in the classroom. Essential questions are not answerable through information retrieval. So it's not a question that I can ask you. You can go and Google something and come right back and say, here's the answer in 30 minutes. They require operating of information to see patterns, implications, and often requires developing new sets of data through critical inquiry on the part of the students. It's not understood in one day or even a week. It's not easily agreed upon, so it could be debatable. Which means there's not one right answer. So can they make a claim? Can they justify it and support it with research and evidence that they have read and discussed throughout a whole unit that you have planned? And that's really hard to do if you're basing your unit, as Kelly mentioned, are we teaching the book Romeo and Juliet, or are we teaching what influences a relationship? And Romeo and Juliet gives us one example, but I'm going to bring in other texts that also discuss and maybe argue what is presented in Romeo and Juliet. Okay? Sample essential questions. What makes a good home for us, for bears, for lobsters, if you usually do some sort of a habitat type of unit? What is a responsible community? So in our workshops we hear a lot, okay, we do a lot of units, especially at the elementary level, around the idea of community. So what is a responsible community? You pose that to students, there's not going to be just one answer. And I mean, what a community is to one student might differ from another student. What makes a great leader? There's a lot of argument with that, not just in the classroom. How has our climate shaped how we live and work? What harms a relationship? What geometry concepts would be essential to build a new gymnasium, including the ordering of materials? What makes a good friend? Okay. How does rap music and its counterpart, oratorical poetry, work for or against social change? So these are big questions. And students can have an opinion about it right away, but then you're going to look at a lot of different information, read a lot of text to get different perspectives, which as we read, when we read the Common Core standards, it emphasizes over and over, look at multiple perspectives.